come. In those words of the great Persian poet and Sufi Saint Rumi, come, come whoever you are, because we bid you welcome. If you come with weary spirits seeking rest, we bid you welcome. If your troubles are too much with you, who are hurt or fearful, we bid you welcome. If you come with hope in your heart, with a firm step, with pride and joy in your life, we bid you welcome. If you are seeking something more or fleeing something less, we bid you welcome. If you wish to learn, to grow, to change, we bid you welcome. If you return after a long absence or just a week, whoever you are, whatever you have been and whoever you are becoming, wherever you are on the journey of your life, come, come whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. We bid you welcome. I've chosen for our first hymn a familiar tune with an invitational text, Bring, O Morn, thy music. Mourning and music seem to go together, and so we'll lift our hearts with our voices as we sing together hymn number 39.
Please join me in the responsive invocation listed in your order of service. We must overturn so many idols, the idol of self first of all, so that we can be humble. Liberation that raises a cry against others is no true liberation. Liberation that means revolutions of hate and violence, takes away the lives of others, or erases the dignity of others, cannot be true liberty. Good morning. My name is Matt Riegler, and I'm a Catholic. I say that as a sort of admission of guilt because if there's one thing that Catholics know, it's guilt. But it's also as good a spot as any to start the story of my journey to Fountain Street. I came from a Catholic family. I went to Catholic grade schools. Every Sunday I went to Mass and CCD, which is kind of like character school, except with a lot more memorization. I graduated from a Catholic high school. I was married in a Catholic church, and my children were baptized in the Catholic church. But as I progressed through my 30s, I drifted away from the church. Part of it was just growing misgivings over to the role of women in the church and their stance on abortion and birth control. But part of it was just an organic restlessness with my life in general. And I got a divorce, and after my divorce, I basically stopped going to church. I still called myself Catholic, but I became what I've heard referred to as a cultural Catholic. And I note here that this is also where I stopped capitalizing the word Catholic in my notes, which is probably a sign of something. Not long after that, I met Camilla, and we became inseparable. Neither of us were attending church on a regular basis. A few years after we met, her mother had a stroke and moved to Grand Rapids. And the two of them needed to find a church in town here. And they tried a few different places, and they ended up here. I didn't join them because Catholic. But she asked me to join her one Sunday, and I did. And I think my first service that I attended was, the music was selections from Rent or Wicked or Godspell or something like that. And it felt pretty non-churchy to me. To someone who's accustomed to the ritual of a Catholic Mass. But I said, the building is really churchy, but then I noticed that there's Darwin and Da Vinci and Newton and Lincoln over in the stained glass, and I was, I had to ask myself what in the world I'd gotten myself into. But I came back anyway because it turned out that the service was more churchy than I realized at first blush. It was spiritual, and it was thought-provoking, and the music was always beautiful. And before I knew it, I was coming every Sunday. And now I can't imagine not coming here. I walked a few miles with Fred last spring when he went to Cadillac. And one of the many things we talked about was my hesitancy to actually sign the book here. And he reminded me that signing the book here didn't mean I was giving up something else. And he was right. I finally signed the book a few months ago, after about 5 years of regular attendance. And I used to say that I went to Fountain Street Church, and now I pretty proudly say that I'm a member of Fountain Street Church. A Catholic member, but a member nonetheless. I'm 51 years old, and there's still a lot of things I want to do. I want to hike the Appalachian Trail and learn Spanish and be the lead singer in a rockabilly trio. And every Sunday I walk out of these doors feeling a little bit more energized and hopeful and inspired, just a bit more than when I walked in the doors. And it brings me a little bit closer to doing those things that I still want to do. Because Fountain Street Church, here we go, frees my mind, it grows my soul, and it changes my world. It turns out that I belong here, and you do too. Thank you.
Now, this is the last Sunday we will hear the choir in its totality until September. So while it is spiritually always questionable to applaud, I'm going to give you a pass on that when they do their next anthem, which you will not want to applaud. In fact, I want you to listen to it very deeply. And after a moment, 5-6 seconds of real silence, then I want you to appreciate them. They have been they're always marvelous, but I've come to love who they are as well as what they are, more and more. Time for readings, and I do want to make mention of the fact, Matt, thank you so much. That's called testimony, Mr. Matt. It's something that in the evangelical tradition, when you show your story of conversion. In this case, it's more deconversion, but we'll take it one way or the other. I like to say we do the other. We don't go. It once was found, but now I'm lost, and I'm okay with that. It's what it comes down to. But my mother was a good Catholic. At least she tried to be until she married my father. But there is a picture of me, and there's a picture of her in the Roman Catholic Church where she was married. My father went along for the ride. And there is a picture of me in a christening gown, but I'm not sure they did more than take the picture. I could well be a member of the one holy Roman Catholic Church, but I've never darkened their door in all my life. So, and I should point out, Matt, even good liberals use parochial education. My younger son, who's sitting up there, is a proud graduate of Central Catholic, go Cougars. And if you're from West Catholic, tough luck. I've got to take sides on something, after all. A few words, more words than I usually have for readings, but these were so rich I couldn't let them go by. This week in the Jewish tradition, we are in a place in the book of Numbers that lifted up a favorite story of mine, one that I've told before. This is during the time that Israel is in the wilderness, and God has told Moses to bring 70 men into the tent so they can be given the authority to help Moses do things. But 2 men, one named Eldad and one named Medad, had remained outside the tent in the camp, and yet the Spirit of God rested upon them as well. They were among those recorded, but they had not gone inside. And they, like the others, began to speak in ecstasy, meaning that they had the sense of God's Spirit in them. And a young man, a youth, ran out and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. Tattler little boy, wasn't he? And Joshua, Moses' military commander, went to know Moses and said, Sir, you must restrain them. But Moses said to Joshua, Are you jealous for them on my account? Would that all God's people were prophets, and would that God put his Spirit on all of them. Ursula K. Le Guin, who is a wonderful writer of science fiction, observed that to learn which questions are unanswerable and not to answer them, this skill is most needful in times of stress and darkness. Frank Lloyd Wright, whose 150th birthday is nearby, observed at one point that early in my career I had to choose between an honest arrogance and a hypocritical humility. I deliberately chose honest arrogance, and I've never been sorry. Wendell Berry said, We have lived by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. And this has been based on the even flimsier assumption that we could know with any certainty what was good even for us. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what is good for the world is good for us. I do not doubt that it is only on the condition of humility and reverence before the world that our species will be able to remain in it. And finally, from the too short life of David Foster Wallace, this from one of his essays. A true democratic spirit is up there with religious faith and emotional maturity. I'm going to start that over again. A true democratic spirit is up there with religious faith and emotional maturity that people spend their whole lives working on. A democratic spirit's rigor and humility and self-honesty are, in fact, so hard to maintain on certain issues that it's almost irresistibly tempting to fall in with some established dogmatic camp and to follow that camp's line on the issue and to let your position harden within the camp and become inflexible and to believe that all the other camps are either evil or insane and to spend all your time and energy trying to shout over them. Some really interesting thoughts, I think. Only 1 or 2 of them were religious, but I'm not sure they were the religious ones. Who knows? Ordinarily, I do the prayer from the dais, but I'm going to invite the choir to move into position while I talk to you about prayer, because their piece is more prayerful than any words I could come up with. So I'm going to set you up for the prayer that they're going to pray, and you will go along with them. Every one of us has a voice. It may or may not come out of our mouths. My spouse is a wonderfully gifted woman, and one of her gifts in her earlier career that she could still recover if she had the time is the use of American Sign Language, which is a beautiful way of speaking without making a sound. Prayer at its best is a gesture of the soul. It is an opening of your spiritual hands to a larger world, a listening more than a talking, a being present to yourself in a way that you have not been present all week. Because if you can't be present to yourself completely, you cannot hear what the Spirit is trying to say. If you're not fully in the room, you can't hear when someone is asking for your attention. So bring your attentiveness to the room now, all of you. And with the gesture of silence, with the discipline of attention, with the awareness of your presence fully here, pray with the choir this beautiful song, that you might be lifted, inspired, and consoled. And so, let us pray. Marilyn, turn around, turn around, turn around, choir. And now, their leader requires your attention too. Thank you, my love. Actually, I'm kind of jealous. You all stay after I finish talking, and when she's done, you clap, and when I'm done, you say, well, I disagree with you, and you should talk more. So actually, maybe I'll be a music director in my next life, if I'm so lucky. Thank you. And I just decided when I heard that anthem as they rehearsed this morning that that's what needed to be our prayer. And you gave it beauty as well as power. Today I'm going to return to the first thoughts I shared with you when I started back in 2005, the complexity of the word liberal. It has changed meaning over the years, not just over my lifetime, but in the years I've been here. We call ourselves an independent liberal church, a term chosen back, I think, in the late 50s, early 1960s, when being liberal was daring and provocative and, even a little sexy. But in the half century since, liberalism has gone, at least its reputation, has gone from fresh to ripe to soft to rotten. And now when you research the term liberal, you mostly get contemptuous criticisms of it and those who call themselves liberals. Not that liberalism was above criticism when it was potent and powerful. In its heyday, Robert Frost, who we love to remind people stood in this pulpit and spoke, said at one point that a liberal is a man too broad-minded to take his own side in a quarrel. But we still cling to the word here, and I think that's good. Liberalism is larger than any one time or place and will no more vanish from the earth than its opposite, or what we consider its opposite, conservatism. But where I was once comfortable with the word in public, now I'm rather more guarded because it invites assumptions, it invites stereotypes, and leads to a barrage of insulting comments that I have to plow away before I can be heard. Back in 2005, I approached this complexity with the title, How Many L's in Liberal? There are two, obviously, but I mentioned there are really three. But that was just a device to remind you that the word contains more than we think. We forget, for example, that the original, basic, most elementary meaning of the word liberal is not political at all. It's almost spiritual. It means to be generous. No less than Aristotle in his volume on the Nicomachean Ethics, I'm sure you're going to run home and check it directly, says, nor is he liberal who gives with pain, for he would rather the wealth to the noble act. He would prefer the wealth to the noble act, and that is not characteristic of a liberal man. In other words, the virtue of liberality is very real, and it's people who give reluctantly that belie their virtue that they claim. The idea that liberality is a virtue was well established even into the 19th century, when in Dickens' famous Christmas carol, two men come to Scrooge for a contribution to help the poor. When they learn that Marley died, one of the gentlemen says to Scrooge, "We have no doubt that his liberality will be well represented by his surviving partner." It certainly was, says the text. The two of them had been kindred spirits. At the ominous word, liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head. The very study of miserliness. When liberal is the opposite of miserly, it is still a virtue. But Frost's barb points to a reality, a derivative notion, to be generous in considering different points of view. And that's good. but made into an unthinking dogma of its own, it tends toward a perpetual equivocation. On the one hand this, and on the other hand that. I understand your point there, but I get you there, and you look like someone going from foot to foot who can't make up your mind. Someone more glib than I coined the phrase, don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. And that is the risk of liberality gone to seed. Generosity, though, is still at the heart of the notion, and that gets lost. No less a conservative than Winston Churchill, in his younger years, said that, commenting on his times, socialism needs to pull down wealth, liberalism seeks to raise up poverty. Socialism would destroy private interests, liberalism would preserve them by reconciling them with public right. Socialism would kill enterprise, liberalism would rescue enterprise from the trammels of privilege and preference. Socialism assails the preeminence of the individual, liberalism seeks to build up a minimum standard for the masses. Socialism exalts the rule, liberalism exalts the man. Socialism attacks capitalism, liberalism attacks monopoly. The spirit of generosity is embedded in those words and can be heard by those who call themselves liberal or conservative even today. Last week I pointed to the distance between what I was told or taught, the difference between the religion of Jesus and the religion about him. That was something I learned, and I spoke about that last week, that I preferred the religion of Jesus to be the small c Christian, the one who followed the path rather than demanded others do it for me. So today I am liberal in the small case sense, but I am not liberal in the large case sense to the extent that liberalism has become its own religion as a social and political ideology that can be quite smug and self-satisfied, quite as content to be sure of its rightness as any good Christian. Despite its origins in wishing to better the common lot, liberalism as an ideology forgot the other aphorism that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Just because you think you're on the right path doesn't mean you're doing it right. The difference between liberal and liberalism for me is the difference between being an idealist and an ideologue. Idealists have great hopes for the future, but we're rather open and maybe not even very sure about how to get there. Ideologues have great hopes for the future, and they know exactly how you need to get there. That's true on the right as well as the left. I am an idealist by nature, quite sure that liberty and justice for all is a hope worth working for. On my hopes and principles, I am quite firm. These are non-negotiable. But on how to get there, I'm rather more open-minded. I hope not to the point where my brains fall out, but I am quite sure that I do not know exactly the course we all must take to get there. Does that open-mindedness to mean that my ends are equally soft and equivocal? No. I think the difference ultimately between liberal and liberalism is more about temperament than substance. Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, not H-A-T-E, scholar of modern moral values, said in an interview with Krista Tippett, whom you may know, he says, even though I'm a political centrist by personality, I'm straight left. Think about that. There is a distinction for him, a conscious one. He is liberal in his values, but centrist in his politics, which means he is capable of negotiating the means, not the ends. He is not being equivocal. He's being flexible. He is not being soft-hearted or muddle-headed, but being creative and adaptable. Far from being a limp-wristed liberal, which, by the way, is also a way to diss gay people on the way through to dissing liberals. There is wisdom in this path. Krista Tippett elsewhere speaks of, in that same interview, fundamentalism and liberalism and terrorism as what she calls partial truths. We must be aware of the limitations of our own vision and of our own capacity for misunderstanding and self-deception. She and he, I believe, are being liberal in the original sense of the word as generous, open to more than one idea because they know there is more than one way to heaven and earth than in any one philosophy. The point they bring is that the true wellspring of liberality and liberalism is another word, humility. There's never been much emphasis on humility in America. We like confidence. We like pluck. We like go-getters. We like the nervy, daring, self-confident types. Humility, of course, sounds meek and mild and self-effacing. It smacks of low esteem, and there are few sins in America worse than having low self-esteem. But is humility low self-esteem? Does it mean thinking less of yourself than others? Oh, you're all fine, I'm terrible. I don't think so. No, it's something like what I read Eleanor Roosevelt saying, in which, quote, I cannot find in print, so I have to give it to you in remembered form. I believe she said something like, never forget that you are a unique creation in this world, and never forget that everyone else is also. It is realizing your own value and that of others. And to me, that is humility. Liberalism, the ideology, begins to prescribe what's good for everyone. One of my favorite stories is about the two old Bolsheviks. They're sitting on a park bench. They're both leaning on their canes, stroking their beards, when one of them utters a cry, "Come the revolution, we'll all eat strawberries and cream." And a long senior moment passes. And the other Bolshevik says, "But I don't like strawberries and cream." Another moment passes, and the first Bolshevik looks at him and says, "Come the revolution, you'll have to like strawberries and cream." That is the peril of do-gooderism that lands in the arrogance of certainty. It is the very opposite of humility. It is actually hubris, even when it is done in the name of justice. Now, hubris can and does exist across the human spectrum. In my humble opinion, modern conservatism is actually more susceptible to hubris these days because, as the ascendant point of view, it participates in the inevitable corruption that comes with power in all its forms. See, I won the election, I must be right, and you must be wrong. But that can happen to liberals too, and it did. But actually, in the case of liberalism, it's worse, because it betrays our core commitment to humility itself, to caring not just for our rightness, but for what is right, whether we know it or not. The ideological conservative, at least, can claim to be consistent because they have always had contempt for people who were wrong, which they know because they are right. The moral, spiritual, and political hope of liberalism rests on claiming the ironic power of humility. Power of humility? Is that the most contrary thing you've heard of in America? Is Mark Zuckerberg humble? Is Bill Gates humble? Or are the tycoons and winners of America humble? Is the president humble? Must I ask more rhetorically stupid questions? Yes, humility has power, greater power even than self-confidence. Behold in your mind the greatest leaders of our era. What names leap to mind? Gandhi, Mandela, King. People who lived within humility as their nature. No, that does not mean they refused to lead, but none of them insisted they were entitled to lead others. They felt the weight of expectation and their own limits in carrying it. They kept their eyes on the prize and not in the mirror. Mind you, they were not living saints and had their share of flaws. We have all heard the sordid expectations of Dr. King, who was sexually unfaithful. We may not remember, but Nelson Mandela also strayed from fidelity and had Ronald Reagan's gift for cultivating image. And Mr. Gandhi, who came close to being a saint, was rather puritanical and was angry with those who weren't as saintly as he was. So when I say humility, I do not mean that they saw themselves as the center and focus. They always saw themselves as a means to something beyond themselves and submitted themselves to that and the judgment of its correctness. In some ways, it's like that famous prayer attributed to St. Francis. He didn't write it, by the way, but we associate it with him because of the humility in it. It starts, "Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace." Not a leader, not the boss, not the president, not the king, not the monarch, not the CEO, not the tycoon, not the entrepreneur, but the instrument of thy peace. Make me an instrument. That is the prayer I want to lift up. It is a prayer to be of use for a greater good that I can only sense but cannot control, nor do I pretend fully to understand it. And now that I think about it, I think that is the liberal dream, that every one of us, like Eldad and Medad, be possessed of a spirit that is larger than ourselves, that brings with it hope that is larger than our own lives. Yes, we need individual freedom, and we must ever be conscious of the predations of the state to limit it. Yes, we need to have justice, and we must be ever present to its corruptions and its denials. But what we look for in life is not liberty and justice as an end, but as a means to something larger even than that. In the Washington Post this week, yet another author, has come up with the secret to happiness. She discovered, surprise, surprise, that happy people have deep relationships with other human beings and a sense of purpose or meaning. We must be reminded every few years of the obvious, apparently. But it turns out that successful people are not happy because they're successful. Neither are wealthy people, nor are winners, nor even those who are at the top of whatever heap. What makes people feel whole and true and good and wise and happy is a sense of community with other human people, other human beings, and a sense of purpose within that community. Sounds like church to me. You would rather be outside, but something in you needed something of community, something of purpose that made you come here today. Do you know that atheists are now getting together for Sunday assemblies? They don't call it worship. They don't call it worship, and that's all right. They have discovered the value of community and common purpose. Because an atheist alone, well, let me put it to you this way. That's the person who, shall we say, occupies the famous gravestone, all dressed up and nowhere to go. The point is, you cannot be a full human being by yourself and have any sense of value or purpose just for yourself. We need a community. It's a family, it's a church, it's a neighborhood, it's a nation, it could be a species, all of those things. And we want to believe that our lives are making that community, those communities, richer for our presence. Those who say they do not need church are wrong. And we are glad that people like Matt said, I belong here. We're glad to say that anyone who walks in here belongs here, not because you ought to be here, but because you are here. That's what being alive is about. The story from Numbers is the one I've recounted many times. I mentioned it already. It's a favorite of my teachers when I went to seminary. And I can tell you that the people who understand what Eldad and Medad were going through are the choir. You know that feeling, don't you? When somehow the piece of music is carrying you along. When your voice belongs to a larger voice and it isn't you anymore, but you're part of something, yet you are part of it as well. That sense of belonging and purpose and direction and beauty and truth is all there when the choir really sings at its most beautiful. And that's why you're in the choir. Am I right? That and the parties, of course. We all want that feeling, whether it's here or the choir. We all want that feeling. We all need that feeling, that we are powerful but not alone, that the powerful part in us is greater than us and wider than our own lives. The liberal hope, underneath all of the politics, underneath all of the platforms, the slogans, and the anger, the liberal hope is that we can make a world where more people can feel that more often, where there can be more community as well as more liberty. There can be more meaning as well as justice. Not perfect, we are humans. Imperfection is our gift. But we need more, we want more, and we can have more together. Liberty and justice, community and meaning. That hope, outlandish, naive, preposterous, foolish, filled with the folly of hope, is what the liberal is all about. But I honestly believe that if everyone were truly honest, we would all admit to wanting just that. And if I'm right, and I think I might be right, but humility forbids me. And if I'm right, I guess that makes everyone a liberal if they would dare admit it, if they were humble enough to accept it. And our task, friends, is to make it possible for our humility to take over the world. How ironic would that be? Yes, so go ahead and call me a fool. Go ahead and call me a liberal, because I believe that we can have a world like that. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. I lift up at this moment as a blessing to those who have gone before, my gratitude for their lives, and wish their benediction upon these words in this hour of worship. I lift up the names of Marie Lindbergh, Pat Chandler, Dirk Nebeling, and Gracia Denton. Thou art filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your presence to the souls of our beloved and our blameless who went to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings, bind their souls to you and to the living, that they may rest in peace, that we may be at peace. And let us say,